Listen, there was a truck parked sideways across a mountain road in southwestern Appalachia. Engine off, no plates visible, nobody inside. And she had passed it going up. And when she looked in the rearview mirror 3 minutes later, it was gone. Not pulled to the shoulder, not turned around. Gone. The road behind her was empty and the hollow fog was already covering the first curve. She still had 7 miles of gravel between her and the county road. The key tag from her rental cabin had the landlord's handwriting on it. She had checked the lock 4 times before midnight, and she still left before sunrise. She had not planned to be on that road at all. This account came through our submission form 14 months ago. The sender asked us to change the county name. We did. Everything else is as she wrote it, including the detail at the end that she says she still cannot account for, the one that made her stop in a diner for an hour before she felt ready to drive again. Her name, for the purposes of this account, is Mara. She was 32, driving solo through a stretch of southwestern Appalachia on a Thursday in late October, cutting time off a longer route. She was not hiking, she was not exploring. She was trying to get to a family property 2 counties over before dark, using a paper map her uncle had marked the previous spring with a blue pen and the note, "Faster, no trucks." The road he had circled was the haul road above Garrison Hollow. She had filled the tank at the last town, a place with 1 gas station, 1 traffic light, and a hand-lettered sign in the window that said, "Coffee fresh, 5 a.m." She bought the coffee. It was in a styrofoam cup in her cup holder, still warm. She had her jacket folded over the passenger seat and her boots up there too, because she'd been driving since 6 and her feet needed air. The radio worked for about 2 miles past the last tower, and then it became a single country station fading in and out. And then it became static, and she turned it off. The hollow changed the light. She had driven mountain roads before, but the way the hollow caught the afternoon and held it was different. Not darker exactly, just earlier, as if the sun had made a private agreement with the ridge that it would leave this particular stretch an hour before everywhere else. By 4:15, the road ahead of her was the color of old pavement, and the tree line on both sides had gone from brown-orange to a flat gray-green that offered no depth. The haul road itself was not on her GPS. It appeared on the paper map as a thin, unlabeled line between 2 county roads, drawn so faintly her uncle must have used a pencil first and gone over it in blue after. The road was real enough, packed gravel, old skidder ruts running parallel along the shoulders, the center ridge between the tire lines overgrown with broom sedge going to seed. A working road from another decade. The kind of road that gets used twice a year by someone who knows exactly where it goes. She was about 2 miles in when the truck passed her. It came downhill, moving slowly. She pulled right to give it room. The road was barely wide enough for 2 vehicles moving in opposite directions, and she had to let her passenger tires drop into the shoulder drainage to clear it. The truck was older, a full-size pickup in a color she could not pin down in that light. Dark blue or green or just dark. No headlights, no plates that she could see, though she only had a second to look. The driver did not acknowledge her, did not wave, did not adjust speed, just continued downhill at the same pace, past her, and was gone around the curve behind her. She checked the mirror. Nothing. She explained it to herself the way you do on roads like that. Local truck. Someone checking on property, running a hunting access, maybe a timber holdup in the ridge somewhere that she could not see from the road. No headlights because the driver had driven this road 1,000 times, and the fading light was still enough to see the center line. No plates visible because she had barely looked. The road curved uphill. She took it in first gear, the engine working. Coffee getting cold. 3 curves later, the truck was parked sideways across a wide spot in the road. She stopped. The truck was facing downhill, positioned across both usable lanes, engine off. No one in the cab, no one on the road beside it. She sat for a moment, then honked once, the kind of short, polite horn tap that means, "I'm here. I mean, no trouble." Nothing moved. She waited another 30 seconds. Still nothing. She could not reverse down a one-lane road in failing light for 2 miles back to the county road. The shoulder on the uphill side was tight but passable, gravel. Then maybe a foot of compressed berm before the drainage drop. She moved slowly, angling left, letting the passenger side tires find the berm, while her driver's side cleared the truck's hood by what felt like 8 inches. The steering wheel vibrated from the uneven ground. She did not look at the truck's interior as she passed it. She could not have said why, except that something in the way it was parked, not pulled over, not abandoned carelessly but placed, made her want to look forward. She cleared it, got back to the road center, checked the mirror. The truck was there, still sideways, still empty. She kept moving uphill. The hollow fog was visible now in the rear view, not up at the road level yet, but filling the low places below the first curve, the way fog does when it has been waiting. She was breathing normally. She told herself she was breathing normally. She was 2 miles from the ridgeline where the road met a paved county road, and that was close enough to be the right decision. When the road widened into a flat turnout, enough space to swing the car around if she had wanted to, she almost did it. She pulled forward into the space, straightened, and looked in the mirror one more time. The truck was gone. Not at the shoulder, not at the curve. The road behind her was completely empty, and the fog had come up to the second curve, and it was still and gray and flat as a ceiling. She sat in the turnout for 10 seconds, telling herself it had reversed back down, that the driver had come out of the trees and driven it back the way it came while she wasn't watching her mirror. That was possible. That was the reasonable explanation. She had been focused on the road. Then she looked at the ground ahead of her, where the turnout ended and the road continued uphill toward the ridge. There were tire tracks in the soft gravel. Fresh ones, the pressed kind, dark with moisture, still holding their tread pattern. They were facing uphill, continuing in the direction she was going. She had not made those tracks. She had pulled into the turnout from below and had not gone past it. Whatever made those tracks was already ahead of her on a road she had been on alone. She sat with her hand on the gear shift, engine running, the styrofoam cup of cold coffee in the cup holder, and the ridge visible through the windshield where the trees thinned. A gap, probably half a mile, where the sky was still lighter than the road. She shifted into first and moved forward. The tracks led uphill in a single line, pressed cleanly into the wet gravel, holding their shape the way fresh tracks do before the edges begin to crumble. She followed them without meaning to. There was only one direction, and the ridge was close enough that she could see the sky brightening through the gap in the trees. She told herself she was almost out. She told herself that whatever made the tracks had simply come from a side cut she hadn't noticed, some overgrown pull-off hidden by the brush on the uphill side. She told herself a lot of things in that half mile. The tracks continued all the way to the ridgeline and stopped at the tree line, exactly where the gravel road met the paved county road. Not at the shoulder of the pavement, not crossing onto it. They stopped at the edge where gravel became asphalt and did not continue. She pulled onto the county road and sat there with her hazards on for a moment, engine running, watching the rearview mirror. The gravel road behind her was empty and still. The fog had reached the first flat section below the ridge and was sitting there, not rising, just occupying the space it had decided was its. Across the county road, not 40 feet away, there was a gas station. Old building, one pump island, a single overhead light buzzing against the dark that was coming in from the east. A man was sitting in a lawn chair beside the pump. He was wearing a canvas jacket and work boots, and he was not doing anything. Not reading, not on a phone, just sitting there, the way people sit when they've been in one place long enough that sitting is just what they do. She rolled down the window. He looked at her without standing. She asked if he knew the road she had just come off of. He said he knew it. She told him about the truck. She kept it plain, the passing, the sideways park, the disappearance, the tracks. She watched his face while she talked. He did not look confused. He did not look skeptical. He said, "That road's been closed since '09. Folks up the hollow put that sign up themselves. You're the third person this month?" She asked what happened to the other two. He said one came out fine, drove straight home, didn't say much. The other one came out and drove to the county line and called from a payphone. She asked what they saw. He thought about it, not like he was deciding whether to tell her, but like he was deciding how accurate to be. Same thing mostly, he said. Something using that road that shouldn't be. Not an animal, not a truck, not really. Something that needed the road to be clear. He said it the way you would say that a road washes out every spring, or that a certain field floods, like a condition of the place rather than an event. She wanted to ask more, but she did not know which question to ask first, and while she was deciding, he nodded toward the county road and said the diner in town was open until 9 if she needed to sit somewhere warm for a while. She drove to the county seat. The diner had 4 tables and a counter with 5 stools, and a woman working the floor who refilled her coffee without being asked. Mara sat at the counter and kept her jacket on and tried to think through the truck. It had reversed. The driver had come out of the timber while she wasn't watching her mirror, gotten in, reversed down 2 miles of 1-lane mountain road in the dark without headlights. Possible. Unusual, but possible. The tracks, though. She had not gone past the turnout. She had pulled in and stopped facing uphill, and the tracks were ahead of her position in the direction of the ridge. Whatever made them had been ahead of her before she reached the turnout, and she had been on that road alone from the moment she turned off the county road 2 miles below. She kept coming back to that, not the truck, not the disappearance, the timing. She left money on the counter, thanked the woman working the floor, and drove the rest of the way to her family's property using only paved roads. She added an hour and 15 minutes to her trip. She did not mind. Here's the detail she included at the end of her account, the one she said she kept returning to. When she reached the ridgeline and pulled onto the county road, she was already facing the right direction, pointing toward the county seat, toward the gas station and the diner. She had not turned around. The road she came off of was a through route, and she had exited facing the direction she needed to go, which was east. But she had entered the Hall Road from the west, off the main county road, and she had driven uphill the entire time, which meant she should have exited facing west. She wrote that she had checked the paper map 3 times in the diner parking lot before she could account for it. She could not. The map confirmed what she remembered. She had entered facing east. She had driven uphill. She had exited facing east. At some point on that road, she had turned around without knowing it. She still uses paper maps. She marks roads she will not use again in red pen. The Hall Road above Garrison Hollow has 3 marks on it now. She wrote that she is not sure what the 3rd mark means, only that 2 did not feel like enough. The channel confirmed, after receiving her account, that a Garrison Hollow does exist in the county she described. The Hall Road appears on 1987 mining survey maps filed with the state. It does not appear on any current county road record. There is no record of it being officially closed. There is no record of it being officially anything. The next account came to us differently. Not through a submission form, not through a contact. It came through a retired ranger who agreed to speak once, briefly, with someone we trust. He worked Forest Service for 19 years. He requested early retirement in the spring of 2019. He agreed to let us use his first name only. His name is Gerald. He told us there is one place in his former district he will not go back to, and that the reason for this is not something he is able to put in a report, because reports require language that fits the thing being described, and he has not found that language yet. He said he may not find it. This is what he told us. Gerald had worked the district long enough that he knew which assignments were routine and which ones had a way of becoming something else. A fire tower inspection after storm damage was routine. He had done dozens of them. Drive the service road, hike the ridge trail, check the structure, document any weather damage to the access stairs or the observation deck, log it, drive out. One day, sometimes less. Cinder Ridge was his district. He knew the trail. He had hiked it probably 40 times over 19 years, often alone, often in conditions worse than the tail end of a fall storm. He was not the kind of person who used words like uneasy to describe a work assignment. He used words like overcast and soft ground and moderate blowdown and trail clear to the tower. He used the word uneasy once in the conversation our contact had with him. He used it to describe the feeling he got before a search went wrong. Not before a hard search, not before a long search, but specifically before the ones that produced a bad outcome. He said he had learned over the years to pay attention to that feeling, not because he was superstitious, but because he had noticed it was accurate. He did not know why it was accurate. He had never tried to explain it. He just paid attention. He felt it when he checked the trail register at the Cinder Ridge trailhead. The register was a standard brown logbook in a weatherproof box on a post beside the gate. Hikers sign in with the date, destination, expected return, and gear notes. Gerald checked it routinely on every approach. Not for safety, mostly, but because the register gave him a sense of recent traffic and whether the trail had been used since the last maintenance pass. On this particular morning in mid-November, the register had 2 entries for the same hiker. Same name, same handwriting. He was certain of this, not guessing. He had looked at them side by side. Same gear list, nearly identical. Day pack, trekking poles, emergency blanket, water filter. The dates were 4 days apart. The second entry was dated the day after the hiker had been reported missing. He photographed both entries. He stood at the register box for a moment, looking at the photographs on his phone, and then he put the phone away and continued up the trail. He told himself what anyone would tell themselves. The hiker had made 2 trips to the ridge, one before the one that went wrong. The second entry was from the first trip. The dates in a trail register were self-reported and often wrong. People filled them out before they left the parking lot. Sometimes the night before, sometimes days later when they remembered they were supposed to. The handwriting matched because it was the same person, and people's handwriting does not change much over 4 days. These were reasonable explanations. He walked the ridge trail for 2 hours, noted blowdown in 3 sections, documented a section of undermined drainage that would need attention in the spring, ate his lunch at the halfway boulder where he always ate his lunch, and reached the fire tower just after 1 in the afternoon. The tower was a standard steel structure, 4 legs, a central staircase, an observation deck and cab at the top. Gerald had the key for the base padlock, which he opened, and he began a standard inspection of the lower structure. The storm had knocked a section of wind brace loose on the north side, which he noted. The staircase had surface rust in 2 sections, but was structurally sound. He documented everything in his field notebook in his particular shorthand that nobody else could fully read, but which made complete sense to him. Then he looked up at the observation deck. The upper door, a heavy door with a hook-and-eye latch on the inside, was secured. He could see the latch bar through the gap at the door edge. He had a key for the base padlock, but the upper door latched from the inside, designed so a ranger could secure it from within the cab during a storm. There was no mechanism to open it from outside. If the latch was set, you needed someone on the inside to release it, or you needed to remove the hinge pins from below, which was a significant undertaking. He stood at the base and thought about this. He called dispatch on the radio. Reception on the ridge was partial. He got through, lost the signal, got through again. Dispatch confirmed that no Forest Service personnel had been assigned to the Cinder Ridge Tower in 8 months. The tower had been taken out of active rotation the previous winter due to budget reductions. Nobody had a reason to be on the deck. Nobody had a key reason to latch the upper door. He circled the tower base twice, checked for signs of unauthorized climbing, the kind of thing kids did, or photographers looking for a view. No wear marks on the steel above the first landing. No scratches around the base padlock from an attempted pick. No boot prints in the soft ground around the legs that he hadn't made himself. The tower had not been climbed from the outside. The latch was set from the inside by someone who had entered through the base using a key, climbed to the deck and secured the door. And there was no record of anyone with authorization doing so in 8 months. He set up camp at the base. This was not the plan, but he decided the situation warranted a supervisor visit, and rather than hike back down and return the next day, he would observe overnight and radio for guidance in the morning when the signal was better. He ate from the pack he always brought, a habit from years of plans changing, and built no fire. Just used the small camp stove and his sleeping bag propped against the north leg of the tower. The structure hummed. That was normal. Steel towers caught the wind and conducted it downward as a low, constant vibration that Gerald knew well enough to find comfortable. He had napped against tower legs before. The vibration was like white noise. He knew its rhythm. At 9 in the evening, the rhythm changed. Not dramatically. Not enough that anyone but someone who knew the sound would notice, but the resonance shifted slightly, the way a floor changes tone when weight moves across it. Gerald sat up from his half-sleep and looked up at the underside of the deck. He waited. At 10:15, the observation light came on. The light was a single fixture on the deck exterior, controlled by a switch on the inside of the cab, powered by a separate solar battery mounted on the roof. Gerald knew the setup because he had helped install the system 6 years earlier. The switch was inside. The door was latched from the inside. The light required someone to flip that switch. He was on the ground. He had been on the ground since 1 in the afternoon. He stood up and picked up his radio. He switched to the main channel. Static. He switched channels. 2, 3, static on each. He found a partial signal and tried dispatch. No response. He switched to the emergency channel, which ran on a different repeater system. Higher frequency, sometimes cleaner on the ridge. The channel opened. Not to static. A voice came through, calm and even, reading trail conditions. Gerald knew what that sounded like. He had done it himself, dozens of times. Date, time, trail designation, surface conditions, hazard notes, visibility. The voice on the emergency channel was doing exactly that, in the correct format, in the correct order. The call sign it used had belonged to a unit decommissioned 3 years earlier. Gerald knew the call sign. He had worked alongside that unit for 6 years before the budget cuts dissolved it. The equipment was turned in. The frequency was retired. The call sign was not on the air. He stood at the base of the Cinder Ridge Fire Tower at 10:15 at night, holding his radio, listening to a voice that could not be transmitting red trail conditions for the sector where a missing hiker had last been seen. He did not move for a long time. Above him, through the steel grating of the deck, the observation light held steady. Gerald did not sleep after that. He sat with his back against the north leg and his radio in his lap, and he listened to the emergency channel until the transmission ended, which it did at 10:47. 32 minutes of trail conditions, read in full, in the correct format, covering every section of the search grid that had been established after the hiker went missing. He knew that grid. He had helped set it. The voice on the channel knew it too, named each section correctly, used the right designation codes, described current surface conditions as of that morning. At 10:47, the channel went to static and stayed there. He had his phone out before the transmission finished. He hit record before the voice stopped, held the phone beside the radio speaker, and kept it recording for 10 minutes after the static returned, just to have the full capture. When he played it back, he heard wind. 42 minutes of wind moving across the ridge, the particular sound of it through the steel tower legs, and his own breathing once at the start when he had shifted position. The voice was not on the recording. He had no explanation for that. He still doesn't. He told our contact that he has considered every technical reason a recording might fail to capture radio transmission. Interference, frequency mismatch, the phone microphone range. And none of them satisfy him completely, because the phone was inches from the speaker, and the voice had been clear enough that he could hear the slight flattening of certain vowels, the particular rhythm the voice used between sections, the way it paused at the hazard notes the way rangers are trained to pause. He climbed the tower at first light. He went slowly, checking each stair section as he went, the way he had been trained to check structural integrity. Wait on the outer edge first, then center, listening for any give. The stairs held. The morning was gray and cold, and the ridge was above the cloud layer, which meant visibility was wide, but the valley below was completely white, as if the hollow had been filled with something solid overnight. He reached the upper landing. The hook and eye latch was no longer set. The door swung open at a push. Easy, no resistance. He stood in the doorway and looked at the cab. Empty. The observation light switch was in the on position. He turned it off. He checked the solar battery housing, charged normally, nothing unusual. He checked the deck exterior. No boot marks on the railing, no sign anyone had stood out there recently. Then he checked the floor. Behind the equipment housing, pushed back against the far wall, was something that should not have been there. A page torn from a trail register. He recognized the paper, the same weight and ruling as the register at the trailhead below. He picked it up carefully with 2 fingers, the way he had been trained to handle anything found at a search site. The page had the missing hiker's name on it. Date, time, destination, gear notes. The handwriting was the same as both entries in the trailhead register below. He knew this immediately, without needing to check, because handwriting has a weight to it that you recognize the same way you recognize a voice. The date on this entry was 3 days after the hiker had been reported missing. He stood on the fire tower deck in the gray morning light, holding a register page dated 3 days after a disappearance, found in a locked cab on a tower that no authorized person had visited in 8 months, and he did what he had been trained to do. He bagged it in an evidence sleeve from his kit. He photographed the cab, the floor, the equipment housing, the door latch. He documented everything in his field notebook. He descended the tower and hiked out and drove directly to the district office. He filed a complete report. He submitted the bagged register page, the photographs of the double entry in the trailhead register, and the phone recording that contained only wind. He requested that a second ranger accompany any future tower inspection on the Cinder Ridge Trail. The Forest Service sent a radio technician to the ridge 2 weeks later. The technician found no equipment within 20 miles capable of transmitting on the decommissioned channel. He filed a note attributing Gerald's reception to atmospheric skip, the phenomenon where signals from distant transmitters bounce off the upper atmosphere and appear on unrelated channels, sometimes clearly, sometimes for extended periods. It was a known occurrence. It happened more frequently at elevation. The note was thorough and professionally written, and it explained every element of what Gerald had heard on that channel, except the call sign. Atmospheric skip carries whatever a distant transmitter is broadcasting. If a station somewhere was transmitting trail conditions on that frequency, the skip would carry their call sign, their actual call sign, the one they were actively using. The call sign, Gerald heard, had been retired 3 years earlier. It had not been broadcast since the unit was dissolved. There was no distant transmitter using it. There was nothing for atmospheric skip to carry. Gerald raised this with his supervisor. His supervisor read the technician's note again and said it was the best available explanation. Gerald said he understood that. He said he was not disputing the note. He was pointing out the one element it did not cover. His supervisor said he understood, and that the register page was being held as evidence in the hiker's case, and that the case remained open. The hiker's body had been recovered from a creek drainage 4 miles from the tower. The recovery was consistent with the original disappearance date. Whatever had written that register page on day 3 of the search had not been the hiker. Gerald completed 2 more seasons after that. He applied for early retirement in February of 2019 and received it in March. The form asked for a reason. He wrote personal. His district supervisor, when our contact reached him, said only that Gerald had been one of the best rangers he had worked with in 30 years, and that some people reached a point where they decided certain things weren't worth knowing. He said it without any particular weight, the way you say something you have said before. Gerald moved to a county with no Forest Service jurisdiction. He does not own a radio scanner. He has a landline. His contact number, the one he gave our contact when they spoke, has a prefix from a county in the flatlands, far east of any ridgeline. He discussed Cinder Ridge once. He said he would discuss it once with specific people, and he kept that. At the end of the conversation, when our contact asked if there was anything else he wanted to add, Gerald was quiet for a moment and then said, "The register page bothered me less than the light. The light needed a switch. The page could have explanations I haven't thought of. The switch has one explanation and I don't like it." He did not elaborate. Our contact did not push. The district supervisor's comment, "Some people reach a point where they decide certain things aren't worth knowing," stayed with our contact on the drive home. Not because it was strange, because of how unsurprised the supervisor had sounded. Not resigned, not sad, just unsurprised. Like it was the expected outcome of a particular kind of work in a particular kind of place. The next account involves a family, a cabin, and a room in the back that the rental listing no longer mentions. The family asked us to use first names only. The mother is Dana. The father is Reese. Their daughter is 8 years old, and in the account they call her C. They rented Cabin 7 at a private mountain campground in the first week of June. They were there for 4 nights. They left after 2. Dana is the one who wrote to us, and the way she writes is the way some people talk when they are trying to be accurate about something they know sounds wrong. Carefully, with a lot of qualifying, circling back to correct the small details, the way you do when the small details matter to you, because you have been over them many times and you know which ones hold up. She wanted us to understand that she is not a person who believes in things easily. She said Reese is even less so. She said that is part of why it took her 3 years to write the account down. The campground had 12 cabins on a wooded property in a mountain county with good fall color and mediocre cell service, and the kind of roads that made a 4-wheel drive feel like a reasonable investment. Cabin 7 was at the far end of the property, set back from the others by about 100 yards of second-growth timber. It had a covered porch, a main room with a wood stove, a sleeping loft above, and a kitchen. The rental listing described it as having 2 sleeping areas and listed the amenities as wood stove, propane heat, full kitchen, screened porch, creek access. The listing did not mention a 3rd room. The 3rd room was behind the kitchen. Dana noticed the door on the first afternoon, while she was checking the wood stove instructions taped to the inside of the cabinet above the stove. The door was at the end of a short hall off the kitchen, plain wood, no lock, just a round knob. She opened it, expecting a utility closet, and found a room. 12 by 14 feet, she estimated. 1 window on the north wall, nailed shut with 4 finishing nails driven in at angles. A bare mattress on a metal frame. The floor was swept clean. The room smelled like a room that had been closed for most of the winter and opened briefly and closed again. She pulled the door shut and went back to the kitchen, and that was all she thought about it until C refused to go near it. C was a mover. That was how Dana described her. A child in constant forward motion, inspecting everything, opening every drawer, testing every chair, running the porch railing with one hand like she was playing an instrument. She had explored every inch of the cabin within 20 minutes of arriving. Every inch except the hall off the kitchen. She went as far as the kitchen doorway and stopped. Dana watched her do this twice without saying anything. The 3rd time, Dana asked her why she didn't go look at the back of the cabin. C said, without any particular drama, that she didn't want to because someone was already in there. Dana checked the room again. Bare mattress, nailed window, empty floor. She came back and told C it was empty, just a storage room, nothing in there. C listened and nodded and went back to unpacking her backpack on the loft bed, and she did not argue, and she did not go near the hall again for the rest of their time at the cabin. Reese's explanation was a spider. Dana wrote that she almost agreed with him because C was not a dramatic child, and she was not a fearful child, and the most likely explanation for a child stopping at a doorway was that she had seen something small and fast disappear under the baseboard. Dana went back and checked the baseboard. Nothing she could see. What she found instead, on her 3rd trip into the room, this time with her phone flashlight, was a crayon drawing tucked between the mattress and the metal frame of the bed. A child's drawing, the proportions loose and confident the way children draw when they are not trying to be precise. A house with a peaked roof, trees around it, and at the back of the house, a red rectangle. She recognized the shape. She brought the drawing out to the kitchen and held it next to the view through the window, and the red rectangle was approximately where the back room would be if you were looking at the cabin from the outside. She showed it to Reese. He looked at it for a moment and said, "Previous renters, obviously. Some kid left it under the mattress," and he went back to the stove he was trying to light. Dana put the drawing on the kitchen table and went to help him. That night, after C was asleep in the loft and Reese had followed not long after, Dana stayed up reading. The main room was warm from the stove. The porch light was on outside and she could hear moths working against the screen. The coffee she had made after dinner was getting cold at her elbow. It was a good cabin, she wrote. She wanted to make that clear. In the main room at night, with the stove and the book and the sound of the creek somewhere below the property line, it was a very good cabin. Then she felt the heat from the back room. Not dramatically, not a wave of it, not a sudden change. Just an awareness, the way you become aware of warmth coming from another room when a door is open. She looked toward the kitchen. The door at the end of the hall was closed, the way she had left it. She set down her book and walked to the kitchen and put her hand on the door. The door was warm. She opened it. The propane heater on the back wall was running. The dial was turned to its maximum setting. The room was close and very warm, the heat with nowhere to go because the window was nailed shut. She crossed to the heater and turned the dial to off. She stood there for a moment listening to it tick as it cooled. She had not turned it on. Reese had not turned it on. She was certain of this because Reese had never been in the room. C had not been in the hall. The heater was running on its highest setting in a room with a nailed window that no one had entered since Dana's first afternoon check. She stood in the room for a moment and looked at the drawing in her mind, the red rectangle at the back of the house. Then she turned off the light, pulled the door closed, and went back to her book. She did not wake Reese. She wrote, 3 years later, that she felt embarrassed by the heater, as if being frightened by a propane setting was something she would have to defend. She didn't want to be the one who made it strange. She picked up the crayon drawing from the kitchen table and looked at it again. The red rectangle at the back of the house. She had registered it at first glance as a solid block of color, the way children color in shapes. But in the low kitchen light, holding it closer, she could see that inside the red rectangle there was a thin vertical line, like a figure, standing inside the room, facing the window that was nailed shut. She set the drawing face down on the table. She looked at the guest book instead, the blue binder on the shelf by the door, 11 years of the weekend entries, names and dates and short notes about the stove and the creek trail and the drive-in. She read backward through them, looking for ordinary people who had enjoyed an ordinary weekend and written something cheerful. She found them, plenty of them, 11 years of them. The second to last entry was from 8 months ago. It was written in a tidy, small hand, and it described the cabin positively, the porch, the stove draw, the quiet. It ended mid-sentence. The sentence began, "Whatever you do, don't let the kids." The page ended there. The next page had been torn out, cleanly, along the binding. Dana sat with the binder open in her lap for a long time. The stove ticked. The moths worked the porch screen. The hall to the back room was dark, and the door was closed and the heater was off, and the room was just a room. Then C's voice came from the loft. Not loud, not frightened. The soft, continuous sound of a child talking in her sleep, the kind of half-language that has rhythm without meaning. Dana had heard it before, and it had never bothered her. What bothered her was the name. C said it once, clearly, between 2 runs of sleep murmur. A girl's name. Not a name from their family. Not a name from C's school or her friends or any program she watched. A name Dana did not recognize at all, said in C's voice with the particular ease of someone saying the name of someone they know well. Dana sat very still. The loft was quiet again. The name did not repeat. She looked at the torn edge of the guestbook page for a long time, and then she looked at the hall, and then she looked at nothing. Dana did not sleep. She stayed in the main room with the lamp on and the stove going and the guestbook closed on the shelf where she had put it back, and she sat in the chair nearest the front door with her feet on the floor and her hands in her lap, and she waited for morning, the way you wait when going to bed feels like the wrong decision and you cannot fully explain why. Reese came downstairs at 6:15. He found her in the chair with her jacket over her shoulders and the lamp still on against the morning gray coming through the windows. He looked at her for a moment and she told him everything. The heater, the drawing, the guest book entry, the name. She told it in order, plainly, the way she had been rehearsing it in her head for the past several hours. Reese listened. He was quiet for a moment after she finished. Then he said he was going to check the back room. She did not argue. She watched him walk through the kitchen and down the short hall and open the door. She heard him move around in there, the particular sound of someone establishing that a room is empty, opening the small space methodically. He was in there for about 2 minutes. Then he came back to the kitchen doorway and leaned against the frame. He said the room was empty. He said it with the careful tone of someone who wants to be accurate. Then he said she should come look at the windowsill. The window was on the north wall, nailed shut. A single pane about 18 inches wide. The sill on the inside was coated in the fine gray dust that accumulates in closed rooms. The kind that settles over months and does not disturb unless touched. Reese had not touched it. Nobody had touched it since Dana's checks the previous day. The dust was disturbed in a long horizontal smear along the inner edge of the sill, with 2 smaller compressions at even intervals, the kind of marks that would correspond to hands pressed flat against the glass, pressing outward. Not inward, outward, as if something inside the room had been standing at the window and leaning against it. Dana looked at the marks and then at the nailed frame, and then at the floor below the window, which showed nothing. The dust on the floor was undisturbed. Reese said nothing. He was looking at the mattress. She followed his look. The mattress was flat and bare and unremarkable, except that behind the metal frame, pushed against the baseboard, was a second crayon drawing. This one was not a child's casual work. The lines were deliberate. The proportions were considered. It showed the same house, the same peaked roof, the same tree shapes at the corners, but this version was drawn as if from outside the back room window, looking in. In the center of the room, a figure facing the window. And in the window, rendered in careful strokes, 2 eyes looking in from the outside. Reese picked it up. He looked at it for a long time. Dana looked at it. Neither of them said what it was depicting. Reese put the drawing in his jacket pocket. He said they should take C to the camp office and ask about the room. They did not get to the camp office that morning. C woke up asking for breakfast, and the morning moved the way mornings move with an 8-year-old. Food, then the porch, then a walk to the creek below the property, then lunch. Dana watched C all morning. C was fine. She was completely herself, running ahead on the creek path, picking up rocks, narrating everything she found. She did not mention the name she had said in her sleep. When Dana asked gently if she had dreamed anything, C said she dreamed about a dog. She did not remember any name. That was the first day. They stayed. The afternoon was good, genuinely good, the creek path beautiful in the early summer light, the cabin warm and comfortable by evening. Dana wrote that she almost convinced herself it was manageable, that the heater had a faulty thermostat and the drawing was from a previous child, and the guestbook entry was someone being dramatic. She was almost convinced. The second night, Dana woke at 2 a.m. to C's voice. She was in the loft, and the voice was coming from below, from the main room. She sat up. Reese was asleep beside her. She climbed down the loft ladder and found C in the kitchen doorway. C was standing facing the hall, facing the closed door at the end of it. Her eyes were open. She was talking in a low, continuous voice, the same half-language from the night before, the rhythm of it steady and unhurried. She was completely asleep. Dana had seen C sleepwalk once before, 2 years ago, briefly. This had the same quality of presence without awareness. Dana crossed the kitchen and put her hands on C's shoulders and turned her gently and walked her back toward the loft. C did not resist. She continued talking in the low murmur as Dana guided her, the words without meaning, the rhythm unchanged. Then Dana heard the sound from the back room. She stopped moving. C was against her, still murmuring, and from behind the closed door at the end of the hall came a sound that made Dana's hands tighten on her daughter's shoulders without her deciding to tighten them. It was low. It was rhythmic. It matched C's voice, not the words. There were no words, but the cadence of it, the length of the sounds, the pauses, the pattern. As if something behind that door had been listening to C long enough to learn the shape of how she spoke, and was now completing her sentences. Dana picked C up. C was 8 and not small, and Dana had not carried her in 2 years, but she picked her up and carried her to the loft ladder and got her up it and put her in the bed and pulled the blanket over her and stayed crouched at the top of the loft with her hand on C's back until C's murmuring stopped and her breathing changed to the long, slow rhythm of deep sleep. Reese woke when Dana touched his arm. She did not speak. She pointed at the floor below, and he listened, and after a moment he heard it too. The low, rhythmic sound from the back of the cabin, still going, patient and even in the dark. It stopped while they were listening to it. Not abruptly, it faded the way a voice fades when someone decides they are finished, not the way a sound stops when its source is removed. They lay still for a long time after it stopped. Neither of them went back to sleep. At 5 in the morning, Reese went downstairs and began packing the car. He did not discuss it, he just started packing, and Dana packed the loft, and they worked around C until she woke on her own at 6:30, and they told her they were going home a little early because the weather was going to turn. C accepted this completely. She helped carry her bag to the car. Dana returned the key to the camp manager at the office near the entrance. The manager was a man in his 60s who had clearly been up for a while, coffee in hand, a radio on low somewhere in the office behind him. Dana told him briefly about the back room, the heater, the window marks, the sound. She did not tell him about C. She watched his face while she spoke. He looked at the cabin number on the key tag before he responded. He took one full breath. She noticed the breath, the particular quality of it, like someone adjusting before they speak rather than simply inhaling. He said Cabin 7 had some history. He said they usually put families in 3 or 8. She asked why they had been placed in 7. He said the booking system didn't flag it. He said it as if this were an administrative failure he had noted and not yet corrected. He offered her a refund for the 2 unused nights without being asked. She accepted it. She did not ask him what the history was. She wrote, 3 years later, that she had been standing in that office doorway deciding whether to ask, and that she had looked at the tree line in the direction of Cabin 7 visible through the office window, and she had decided that she did not want to be standing in that particular doorway when he finally told her. They drove home. 4 hours. C slept in the back seat for the first 2 and watched out the window for the last 2. She was fine, completely herself. They were 40 minutes from home when Dana was checking the diaper bag in the back seat for her sunglasses and found in the zip pocket of C's jacket a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it. A crayon drawing. Folded very small, the way a child folds something to fit in a pocket. It showed C from behind. The specific blue of C's pajamas, the specific length of her hair, the way it fell at the back of her neck. C standing in a kitchen doorway facing a dark hall. The perspective was from inside the hall, from the direction of the back room door. Dana did not say anything. She folded the drawing and held it in her lap for the rest of the drive. When they were home, and Reese was unloading the car and C was inside, Dana asked C about the drawing. C said she didn't draw it. She said it matter-of-factly, without defensiveness, the way she said true things. Dana asked where it came from. C thought about it and said the girl in the back room gave it to her. Dana asked when. C said at night when she went to talk to her. Dana asked if she remembered going. C said not really. She said the girl was nice. She said the girl knew her name. Dana did not ask anything else. The camp listing for Cabin 7 currently describes 2 sleeping areas. The cabin has 3. The back room is not mentioned in the description. There are no guest reviews that mention it. 1 year after their visit, Dana called the campground to ask, generally, about the cabin's history. The manager answered. There was a pause when she said her name. He said he remembered them. She asked about the room. He said they had used it for storage in previous years, and that it wasn't part of the rental. She asked if other guests had reported anything unusual. He paused again and said some guests found the cabin's layout confusing. She thanked him and hung up. She has not taken C camping since. When C was 10, she asked Dana out of nowhere who the girl in the red room was. Dana said she didn't know. C nodded like this was the expected answer. Then she said, "She knew my name, though, before I told her." Dana wrote that to us at the end of her account, and then she wrote, "I don't know what that means. I have tried not to think about it too much. I don't think that's working." The next account came to us from a backpacking forum that no longer exists. The original poster used a screen name. The post was saved by 3 separate users before the forum closed. This is what the post said. The original post was titled, "Has anyone else used the old logging road that cuts off Route 88 near the state forest boundary? Something happened and I don't know who to tell." It was posted at 3:14 in the morning on a Tuesday. The account below is reconstructed from 3 saved versions, which are consistent with each other in every detail. The poster described himself as experienced, not in the way people say that to establish credibility before telling a story that makes them sound inexperienced. He listed his background flatly, the way someone does when they consider it relevant context rather than a credential. He had been backpacking solo for 11 years. He had done off-trail travel in 4 states. He used both GPS and paper maps as a habit, not as backup for each other, but as independent systems he ran in parallel because he had learned early on that confidence in one source was how people got lost. He was, by his own account, the person his friends called when they needed someone to find them, not the other way around. He found the logging road on a regional backpacking forum, the same forum where he later posted his account before the forum closed. Someone had mentioned it as a connector route between 2 mapped trail segments in the state forest, a way to cut 4 miles off a longer loop using an old skidder road that was overgrown but walkable. The post was 2 years old. 3 people had replied saying they'd used it without issue. He noted the GPS coordinates for the road's entrance off Route 88 and added it to his planned route for a 4-day solo trip in early September. He parked at a wide gravel shoulder on Route 88 just after 7 in the morning. The road entrance was exactly where the coordinates placed it, an opening in the tree line, the old skidder rut still readable under a decade of growth, alder saplings coming up through the center strip, the canopy closing overhead within 30 feet of the highway. He noted the time in his trail log, shouldered his pack, and walked in. The morning was good. He used that word 3 times in the early section of his post. Good, in the specific way people use it when they mean that everything was functioning as expected, and the body felt right, and the light was right, and the pack weight was right, and there was no reason yet to be anything other than content. He walked for 2 hours through the kind of September woods that smell like cold water and old leaves and something faintly sweet from whatever the canopy was finishing before it let go for the year. The road was clear enough to follow without effort. He stopped at a creek crossing to filter water, noted that the creek was running stronger than a dry week would suggest. ate half a bar, checked his GPS. On track. He continued. The first thing he noticed was the sun. He was moving northeast, according to his GPS. This was correct. The logging road ran northeast from the highway entrance toward the ridge connector. The sun, in the gap of sky visible through the canopy, was also to his northeast. At 9 in the morning in early September, the sun should have been east-southeast. Eldad, it could not be northeast. He stopped and looked at both, the GPS track arrow pointing northeast, the light source through the canopy gap also northeast, and tried to reconcile them. He recalibrated the GPS, waited for it to reacquire. The arrow settled and pointed northeast again. He looked at the sun. The light was where the light was. Within 3 minutes, the GPS corrected itself without him touching it. The track arrow shifted to show him moving north-northeast, which matched the sun's position. He noted the discrepancy in his log. GPS drift, canopy interference, approx 3 min, and continued. He was not alarmed. Canopy interference on old logging roads was common. He had seen worse drift in thicker timber. He flagged it as a data point and kept moving. The cairn appeared at the second ridgeline, 2 hours into the walk. It was in the center of the road, not at the edge, not beside a blaze, not at a junction where a cairn might indicate a decision point. In the center of the road, where the center grass strip was flattest. He stopped 6 feet from it and looked at it for a moment before moving closer. It was tall for a trail cairn, 8 or 9 stones, carefully selected for flat faces, stacked with the kind of precision that takes time and intention. The stones had been placed with their flattest faces pointing outward, which was not how people stacked cairns casually. That was deliberate orientation. Somebody had chosen each stone, placed it face out, and balanced the next one on top. The cairn was on an unmarked, unmapped, unofficial logging road that appeared on no trail system. There was no reason for a cairn here. There was no junction to mark, no hazard to indicate, no route to confirm. He photographed it. He walked around it once. He did not touch it. He continued northeast. An hour past the cairn, the road changed. He noticed it first as a texture difference at the edge of his vision. Something on the trees to his left that was not bark and not lichen and not blaze paint. He stopped and looked directly at it. A mark, approximately 6 inches tall, vertical, on the trunk of a red maple at roughly shoulder height. Dark, he could not determine the material from a distance. He crossed to the tree and looked at it closely. The mark was applied rather than carved. Not paint, not ink. Something organic, he thought, though he could not be certain. Smooth-edged, deliberately shaped, not smeared. He looked to his right. The tree on the opposite side of the road had an identical mark at the same height. He looked up road. Every tree on both sides, alternating left and right, carried the same mark, spaced at intervals he later estimated at 30 feet. He walked the marked section and counted. He stopped counting at 40 trees and the marks continued beyond his sight line in both directions. He turned and checked behind him. The marks extended back past the cairn, back further than he could see. He had walked through this section an hour ago. He had not seen the marks. He stood in the corridor of marked trees and took photographs and tried to think about what kind of person or group would come to an unmapped logging road and mark alternating trees at 30-foot intervals for what appeared to be at least a mile in both directions, without leaving any footprints, without leaving any debris, without any apparent purpose that connected to forestry or trail maintenance or any land management practice he recognized in 11 years of backcountry travel. He could not think of a satisfying answer, so he checked his map. The loop connector, the turnoff that would take him from the logging road onto the mapped trail segment, should have been 0.3 miles ahead. That was close. He decided to reach it before making any decision about the marks or the road or any of it. Decisions at waypoints were cleaner than decisions in the middle of a corridor of marked trees. The forest had been quiet since the cairn. Not the comfortable quiet of an empty trail on a weekday. He knew that quiet well and liked it. This was different, and he was precise about the difference in his post. No birds, which was unusual for September, and no insects, which was very unusual, and no wind movement in the canopy despite the fact that he could see the sky moving above the gap, clouds shifting, air clearly in motion above the tree line. Everything above the canopy was moving. Everything within it was still. And then there was the sound he could not locate. He described it carefully because he wanted to be accurate, and he knew it sounded strange. A low sound, not quite a tone. More like pressure, the kind of thing you registered in your chest before your ears confirmed it. It had no direction. He turned slowly, trying to find a side it was coming from, and could not. It seemed to come from the road itself, or from the ground beneath it, or from no particular point in space at all. He walked the 0.3 miles to the connector turnoff. There was no connector turnoff. He checked his GPS. It showed him standing at the waypoint coordinate, the exact point where the turnoff should branch left toward the mapped trail. The road did not branch. It continued straight, northeast, through more marked trees, with no visible junction, no cleared side path, no trace of another route. He stood at the coordinate and did a slow 360. Trees, road, marked trunks. The sound in his chest that had no direction. The sky moving above the canopy in a wind that did not reach the road. Then he heard the footsteps. Behind him. On the road, in the direction he had come from. He turned. The road was empty as far as he could see, but the footsteps continued. Two-footed, evenly spaced, unhurried, on packed gravel, coming toward him at a walking pace. The sound of boots on that specific surface, the particular compression of wet gravel under weight. Not an animal. The rhythm was wrong for an animal. He had spent 11 years listening to what animals sounded like on trails, and this was not that. He stood at the coordinate of a turnoff that did not exist, listening to footsteps approach him on a road he had believed he was alone on, and the marked trees ran in both directions as far as he could see, and the low sound was still in his chest, and the woods were completely silent except for the footsteps and his own breathing, which he had just remembered to do. He turned around. The road behind him was empty. Not empty the way a road is empty when someone has just stepped off it. Empty completely, nothing moving, nothing settling, no branch swaying from a recent passage, no gravel still shifting from a displaced footstep. Empty the way a room is empty when you know with certainty that nothing has been in it. The footsteps had stopped at the same moment he turned. Not before he turned, not after. At the exact moment his body completed the rotation and his eyes reached the road. He stood looking at the empty road for what he estimated was 30 seconds. Then he looked down. His shadow fell forward from his feet, cast by the afternoon light coming through the canopy gap behind him. It was a clean shadow, slightly elongated by the angle of the light, recognizably his, the pack outline on the back, the trekking poles angled outward from his hands. Beside it was a second shadow, not overlapping his. Beside it, at a slight angle, as if cast by something standing 2 feet to his left, the same general height as his shadow, slightly less defined at the edges, but present. A shape with a head, with shoulders, with the slight suggestion of arms at the sides. Not his shadow doubled by some reflective surface. A second shadow, cast by a second object, standing beside him on an empty road. He turned to look at what was casting it, there was nothing to his left. The shadow had no source. He took a photograph. He took 3 from different angles, trying to capture both shadows clearly. He took his time with this, breathing slowly, keeping his hands steady. He was a systematic person, and his instinct under pressure was to document rather than react. Later, looking at the photographs on his phone, he could see only one shadow. His own. The second shadow, which he had looked at directly, which he had photographed from 3 angles, was not in a single image. He decided to move. Not back? He did not want to walk back through 2 miles of marked trees toward a road entrance that he was no longer certain would be where he had left it. Forward was the only direction that made geometric sense, because the connector turnoff had to exist somewhere, because the forum post had confirmed it, because 3 people had used this road without incident 2 years ago, and the connector had been there for all of them. He walked fast. Not running. He had never run on a trail, and he was not going to start now. Partly because running used energy he might need, and partly because he was not ready to admit to himself that running was the appropriate response. He walked at the fastest pace he could sustain, and he did not look at the trees, and he did not look at his shadow, and he counted his steps to give himself something to do with the part of his brain that wanted to do something other than walk. 40 minutes of fast walking. The marked trees continued. The road continued. The low sound in his chest continued, unchanging, directionless. Then he reached the cairn. He stopped. He recognized it immediately. The same stones, the same height, the same deliberate outward-facing placement. He had passed this cairn 2 hours ago, moving forward, heading northeast toward the connector. He had not turned around. He had walked in one direction, forward, the entire time. He was back where he started. He checked his GPS track log. It showed a continuous forward path, no backtracking, no loop, no reversal. The track went northeast from the highway entrance, continued through the waypoint where the connector should have been, and then continued further northeast. According to the GPS, he was not at the cairn. According to the GPS, he was half a mile past the waypoint and continuing. He was standing at the cairn with his GPS telling him he was somewhere else entirely. He sat down on the road beside the cairn and drank water and ate the other half of the bar, and tried to think with the systematic clarity that had served him for 11 years of solo travel. The road was playing a trick on some instrument, either his GPS or his perception or both. He had experienced GPS anomalies before. He had never experienced a perceptual loop, but he could not rule it out, because he had been walking for 6 hours and had eaten less than he should have, and the September afternoon was dropping in temperature, and any combination of those factors could produce a navigational error he wasn't aware of making. What he could be certain of, he was at the cairn. The cairn was real. He had touched it on his first pass, and it was solid. The highway entrance was behind him, 2 miles back in the direction he had come from. He decided to leave the road. Not back down the road, not through 2 more miles of marked trees with footsteps behind him and a shadow beside him and a sound with no location. He picked a bearing perpendicular to the road, going downslope to the west. And he walked into the timber, and he kept walking. It was hard going. Old growth, second growth. The understory dense with mountain laurel that grabbed at his pack straps and made him bend and push and angle through gaps rather than walk. He used his trekking poles to part branches ahead of him. He moved slowly, and he moved steadily, and he checked his compass every 5 minutes rather than his GPS, because he had decided not to trust the GPS until he was off whatever ground it was having trouble with. He struck a drainage creek after 2 hours. He followed it downhill, stepping rock to rock where he could, waiting when he couldn't, getting his boots soaked through in the first quarter mile, and then simply accepting the cold and moving. The creek was loud, and he could not have heard footsteps over it, and he found that he was glad of this. The creek brought him to Route 88 in another hour. He came out of the timber onto the highway shoulder and stood there for a moment in the last of the afternoon light, wet to the knees, pack straps raked with laurel scratches, and oriented himself. He could see his car parked at the gravel shoulder. The car was downhill from him. He had come out of the timber above his parking spot on the uphill side. He had followed the creek downhill for an hour. The parking spot was below him. He stood looking at this for a while. He had started the day below the ridge, driven up to the parking spot, walked into the logging road, which went uphill and northeast. He had come out above the parking spot, after following a creek downhill for an hour. The geometry of this did not work. He should have come out well below the parking spot if he had drifted at all. He should not, under any navigational scenario he could construct, have come out above it. He walked down the shoulder to his car. He sat in the driver's seat with the door open and his wet boots on the gravel, and he looked at the entrance to the logging road across the highway. He could see it, the gap in the tree line, the alder saplings visible for the first 30 feet. It looked completely ordinary. It looked like exactly what it was supposed to be. He posted that night at 3:14 in the morning because he had not been able to sleep. He wrote the account out fully in the order it happened, and at the end he wrote, "I need someone to tell me there is a rational explanation, or I need to know that other people have experienced this. I don't care which one it is, I just need to not be the only one." Responses came within the hour. Most were sympathetic and unhelpful in the way forum responses usually are. Suggestions of GPS anomalies, navigational confusion, the disorienting effect of old logging roads that were built to curve in ways that felt like straight lines. These were not unreasonable suggestions. He acknowledged them in his replies. One response was different. It appeared 30 minutes after his post, from an account with no other post history, created that day, no profile information, no previous activity on the forum. The reply was 4 sentences. "That road is marked. You don't use it. The marks mean it's already in use. Don't go back." He replied, asking what that meant. The account never posted again. A later commenter with a surveying background asked him to share the GPS track log. He shared it. The commenter looked at it and replied, "This track shows you walking a straight line that curves back on itself. That's not how roads work. That's not how anything works." The forum closed 6 weeks after the post. The reason given was that the hosting costs had become unsustainable. The thread was deleted with the rest of the forum's content. 3 users had saved the original post in full before the deletion. The commenter who said the marks mean it's already in use has no record of any internet activity before or after those 4 sentences. He drove past the Route 88 entrance the following weekend, in daylight, in the car, not getting out. He could see the road from the highway. He drove slowly past it. He did not stop. He has not been back. A state forestry database search, conducted after receiving the saved post, confirmed that the land corridor containing the logging road reverted to state ownership in 1994 and has had no active management since. No timber operations, no trail maintenance, no land surveys filed in 30 years. Nobody is building cairns on that road. Nobody is marking those trees. Nobody with any record of being there anyway. The next account involves a trailhead, a county deputy, and a morning that officially did not produce any findings. This is what the deputy told someone, and what that someone told us. The deputy asked that we not use his jurisdiction. He spoke with someone who writes to us regularly, a contact we trust, who has never given us a reason not to. The contact took notes immediately after the conversation, in a car, in a parking lot, while the details were still exact. What follows is reconstructed from those notes. The deputy's name for this account is not given. He did not offer it, and our contact did not ask. He has 12 years in the position, works a mountain county with the particular combination of responsibilities that rural law enforcement carries: animal complaints, accident response, property disputes, the occasional search coordination when hikers go missing on the trails that cross the county's eastern edge. He described himself, when our contact asked about his general disposition toward unusual events, as a person who believed in what he could document and was skeptical of what he couldn't. He said he had revised that position somewhat. He did not say how far. He responded to the call at 5:45 in the morning. A vehicle parked at the Sink Hollow trailhead with the door open and engine running. This was a standard check. Abandoned or distressed vehicle, no occupant visible. He ran the plate on the way in. Registered to a name in a neighboring county. No flags, no warrants, current registration. The trailhead was a gravel lot at the end of a short access road off the county route, room for maybe 8 vehicles, a kiosk with a trail map and bear warning notice, a gate across the trail entrance with a county padlock. The lot was empty except for the truck. An older pickup, dark color, driver door standing open, interior dome light on, engine running. He noted the time, noted the plate, and did a standard perimeter walk before approaching. The ground around the truck was soft, the kind of compacted dirt that holds a clear impression after any moisture. He found one set of footprints, boot treads, adult size, coming from the driver's door and heading toward the trailhead gate. He followed them with his flashlight, bending low to keep the beam at a raking angle that made the impressions readable. The footprints stopped at the gate. Not at the gate, and then continuing on the trail side, at the gate. The last clear impression was 2 feet from the gate post, toe pointing toward it. There were no prints on the trail side of the gate. The gate was locked with the county padlock, which he confirmed with his key. Nobody had gone through the gate. The prints reached it and ended. He unlocked the gate and checked both sides of the trail for 20 yards in each direction. The trail surface was packed clay, damp from overnight condensation. It would have held impressions easily. There were none that didn't belong to the standard pattern of compressed clay from previous foot traffic. A person had walked from the truck to the gate, and the gate had been locked, and there were no prints on the trail side, and there was nowhere else to go. He returned to the truck and looked inside without touching anything yet. Coffee in a travel mug in the cup holder, still hot. He confirmed this by holding his hand near the vent without picking it up. A jacket on the passenger seat folded. A pair of gloves on the dash. The kind of preparation that suggested someone who had planned to hike had organized their gear and had gotten out of the truck. The phone was face down on the dash. He picked it up with a gloved hand to check for ID or an emergency contact. The screen activated when he lifted it. He looked at it. The last open application was a Maps app. The map was centered on a location he recognized. He knew this trailhead and the surrounding terrain well enough that the coordinates were immediately readable to him. The pin was placed approximately 200 feet from where he was standing. Behind him, inside the tree line, on a slope too steep to hike without equipment, off any established trail. The pin had a label. The label said, "Do not look for me here." He stood in the empty parking lot at 5:47 in the morning, holding someone else's phone, reading that label, and he told our contact that he spent approximately 10 seconds deciding what it meant before he called for backup, because 10 seconds was all the time he felt he could spend on interpretation before procedure had to take over. Backup arrived in 18 minutes. 2 of them, The lot now holding 3 county vehicles and 1 abandoned truck with a cooling engine. They searched the slope. It was difficult ground, steep, the understory thick with mountain laurel and rhododendron that formed tunnels rather than gaps, the slope running at an angle that required both hands in places. They were methodical. They covered the coordinate and expanded outward in a grid pattern for 2 hours. They found nothing. No person, no equipment, no disturbed ground, no sign that anything heavier than a deer had been on that slope recently. The coordinate, when they stood at it, was in the center of a dense laurel thicket with no natural opening, no game trail, no access that didn't require forcing through the branches. During the search, at a point when the 2 deputies had separated to cover more ground, the deputy heard something moving in the laurel above him. He stopped and listened. The sound continued. Not loud, not crashing through brush, but the specific noise of something trying not to make noise and not fully succeeding. The sound of breathing and controlled movement. He called out twice, identifying himself. The movement stopped. He moved toward where it had been. Nothing. He found the other deputy 20 yards away. He asked if the deputy had heard anything in the last few minutes. The other deputy said yes. From above, in the laurel. He had called out and gotten nothing and moved toward it and found nothing. They had heard it from different positions simultaneously. Whatever was moving in the laurel had been audible to 2 people in separate locations at the same time. They completed the search and found nothing to document except the phone, the truck, and the footprints ending at the gate. The deputy wrote his report in the lot before driving out. He documented every element. At the end, in the summary section, he wrote, "Vehicle found unlocked, engine running, no occupant located. Area searched, no signs of distress. Referred to county for follow-up." He did not document the sound in the laurel. He told our contact this directly, that he had considered it and decided it did not belong in the report, not because it wasn't real, but because there was nothing to attach it to. A sound in a bush that 2 people heard and neither could locate was not a finding. It was a description of an absence. On his way out of the access road, he stopped at the junction with the county route to make a call. The nearest cell coverage was at this junction. The trailhead itself had nothing. He made his call and then pulled into the county route and drove to the nearest gas station, which was 4 miles east, because he had been on shift since 4 in the morning and his coffee was gone. He had known the woman behind the counter for 11 years. She was one of those people who had worked the same job in the same building long enough that she had become part of the place's permanent inventory. She knew every regular, knew what they drove, knew approximately when they would stop in and for what. She looked up when the door opened and looked at him and said, before he reached the counter, "Sink Hollow?" He stopped. He asked how she knew. She said, "You've got that look. We get that look a couple times a year." He sat down on the stool at the counter. She poured him coffee without being asked. Real coffee, from a proper pot, not the gas station machine. She set it in front of him and leaned against the counter on her side, and looked at him with the specific expression of someone who has been waiting a long time to have a particular conversation, and is now prepared to have part of it. He asked what she meant by that look. She said, "Sink Hollow has a way of not giving things back in the same condition it takes them. Person goes in, person comes out, mostly fine. But the in-between part doesn't always make sense on a map." He asked her to explain that. She thought about how to say it. Then she said, "There are places in this county where you can go in, but you can't come out the same way you went in. Sink Hollow's one of them. The trailhead, specifically. Something about that particular ground. That truck you found, the driver's probably fine. Probably walked out on Route 14 and is already home. But they won't remember how they got there." he asked how long this had been the case. She picked up a cloth and wiped the counter in a slow circle, the way people move when they are thinking rather than cleaning. She said as long as she had worked there. She said as long as her mother had worked there before her. She said she didn't know how much longer than that. He drank his coffee. She did not offer more information, and he did not ask for it yet, because he was still inside the procedural part of his thinking, and the procedural part needed the coffee before it could make room for anything else. But sitting there, with the gas station fluorescents humming overhead, and the county route empty through the front glass, and the coffee doing what coffee was supposed to do, he thought about the footprints that ended at the gate. He thought about two officers hearing the same sound from two different positions. He thought about the label on the phone, which he had photographed before bagging the phone as evidence. "Do not look for me here." Not a cry for help, not a location, an instruction. Written by someone who had sat in that truck in that parking lot and decided, before getting out, to leave a message telling whoever found the truck exactly what not to do. He set down his cup and asked her one more question. He asked if the person who left the truck would really be all right. She considered this more carefully than he expected. She said, "Mostly, they come back mostly themselves. The hollow takes something small, usually, something you don't notice right away. Something you only miss later when you reach for it and it isn't there." He asked what kind of thing. She looked at him steadily. She said she couldn't tell him that because it was different every time, and she didn't think knowing in advance would help. He left a few dollars on the counter and drove back to the station to finish his report. The truck's owner was found 3 days later. Not by the county, not by a search team, not on any trail or road that connected geographically to the Sink Hollow trailhead. He was found at a gas station 22 miles away in the neighboring county, standing at the pump, filling a truck. His truck. The same truck that was sitting impounded in the county lot with its key in the ignition, and a dried coffee ring in the cup holder. The deputy made the call himself. He had the owner's name from the registration, and the neighboring county had run it through their system when the impound paperwork crossed county lines for processing. He dialed the number on file. The man answered on the second ring. The deputy identified himself and explained that they had located a vehicle registered to him at the Sink Hollow trailhead 3 days prior. The man said that wasn't possible because he had driven home that morning. The deputy confirmed the plate number. The man confirmed it was his plate. The deputy told him the vehicle was in the county impound lot. There was a pause, long enough that the deputy checked the line was still connected. The man said, "I drove home. I have my truck." The deputy asked him to look at the truck he was currently standing next to. The man did. He confirmed it was his, the right color, the right year, the right dent in the rear quarter panel from a parking lot incident 2 summers ago. The deputy asked him to check the key in his hand. The man said he had his spare key. He said it like this was a normal thing to say, and then he stopped talking, because he understood that it was not a normal thing to say. His key, his primary key, the one he used every day, the one on a ring with a bottle opener and a small penknife, was in the ignition of an impounded truck in a county lot 22 miles away. He had driven home in his truck using a spare key he did not remember getting out, from a location he did not remember being in, from a morning he remembered as entirely ordinary except that he could not, when pressed, account for the hour between leaving the trailhead parking lot and arriving at his house. He said he remembered parking. He remembered getting out of the truck. He did not remember the walk, or arriving home, or the hour in between. The deputy drove to the neighboring county and met him in person. The man was coherent and calm and genuinely confused in the way that people are confused when the facts available to them do not assemble into a workable picture. He was not evasive. He answered every question directly and the answers were consistent. He had hiked Sink Hollow twice before without incident. He had planned a morning hike and left early to beat the weather. He had parked. He had gotten out of the truck. The next thing he remembered was being at home. He had the spare key. His primary key was 22 miles away in an impounded vehicle. He had no explanation for either of these facts. The deputy filed a supplemental report. He documented the owner's account accurately and without editorial comment, which was how he had been trained to document things and which required some discipline in this particular case. He listed the facts. Owner located. Vehicle impounded, pending owner retrieval. Owner unable to account for transit from trailhead to residence. Primary key remains with the vehicle. He did not write what the woman at the gas station had told him, because the woman at the gas station had not been part of any official interaction, and what she had said did not belong in a county report. But he thought about it. Something small. Something you don't notice right away. Something you only miss later, when you reach for it and it isn't there. The man had lost an hour. Whether that was the thing the hollow had taken, or whether the hour was simply how the taking felt from the inside, the deputy could not determine. He went back to the gas station 2 days after meeting the owner. He sat at the counter and the woman poured him coffee, and he asked her how long the trailhead had been this way. She said, "Long as I know. Longer than that, probably." He asked if anyone had ever reported it officially, filed something, done a study, contacted the state. She looked at him with the particular patience of someone who has heard a reasonable question that has a discouraging answer. She said, "You think you're the first law enforcement person to sit on that stool after a morning at Sink Hollow?" He said he did not know. She said, "You're not. You want to know what happened to the reports those other ones filed." He said he did. She said, "Nothing. Nothing happened, which is why we don't file them anymore." He went back to the station and pulled the call records for the Sink Hollow trailhead going back as far as the system held. He was not certain what he was looking for. Confirmation, pattern, something that would make the gas station woman's account feel less like local belief and more like documented history. He found 11 calls in 12 years, all resolved as no findings, all occurring in a 3-month window, October, November, December, with the same language in the summary line, call after call. Area searched, no occupant located, referred for follow-up. The follow-up line on every one of them was blank. 11 calls, 12 years. The same season, the same trailhead. 11 times someone had walked in or driven to that lot and not come back through the gate the way they went in, and 11 times the responding officer had written no findings and moved on, and the record sat in the system accumulating nothing. He scrolled further back, past the range his own tenure covered, into the older records that had been digitized from paper logs in the mid-2000s. The digitization was incomplete, gaps in certain years, formatting inconsistencies, some records truncated. But in the 1987 records, he found one entry for the Sink Hollow trailhead. The entry had responding officer notes. Every other entry in the system had responding officer notes, sometimes brief, sometimes detailed, but present. The 1987 entry had a notes field that showed a single line of text. Redacted. See Supervisor File Ref SH8711. He searched the system for the supervisor file reference. It did not exist in any database he had access to. He submitted a records request to have the redaction reviewed and the original notes restored. The request came back denied. The denial cited the original responding officer as the sole documentation source and noted that the officer was deceased and no secondary documentation existed to support restoration of the redacted content. He looked up the officer. The obituary was in the county paper's archive, digitized and searchable. The officer had died in 1989, 2 years after the Sink Hollow call. He was 43 years old. The cause of death listed in the obituary was a phrase the deputy had not seen used in an obituary before. It said, unknown, not sudden illness, not after a brief illness, not peacefully at home. Unknown. A 43-year-old law enforcement officer dying of an unknown cause, 2 years after filing a report at the Sink Hollow trailhead that someone later decided needed to be redacted, with the reference file since disappeared. The deputy told our contact this detail last. He had been methodical and even-toned through the rest of the account, the way he had been trained to present information. But when he got to the obituary, he slowed down. He said the word unknown twice, with a pause between, like he was checking that he was remembering it correctly. He adjusted his dawn patrol route the following month. Sink Hollow trailhead now appeared on his route log at 9 in the morning, rather than first light. He did not document the reason for the change. When the new deputy who joined his department the following spring asked about the trailhead, she had noticed the time on the route log and thought it might be a shift coverage issue. He told her over coffee what the retired sheriff had told him, which was what he now considered the only practical guidance on the matter. He said, Sink Hollow, October through December, don't go at dawn, midday, always midday. She asked why. He said it was a local thing, she was not from the county and she accepted this. She adjusted her route accordingly. He did not tell her about the 11 calls, or the owner with the spare key, or the woman at the gas station, or the redacted 1987 record, or the obituary with the cause of death that said unknown. He told our contact that he was not sure what responsible information sharing looked like in a situation like this one. He said he had thought about it more than he expected to. He said there was a version where you told everyone everything, and a version where you told people the practical part, the part that kept them out of the situation, and left the rest alone. He said he had decided on the practical part. He said he hoped that was right. He said it without much confidence. The next account comes from a town, a diner with 4 tables and 1 waitress and coffee that was better than it had any right to be. And the most frightening person in the account is not in the woods. She is behind the counter and she already knows why you're there. This one came to us differently. Not through a submission, not through a contact with a second-hand account. We visited a mountain county for a different story, a road closure that turned out to be less interesting than the reason for it, which is sometimes how these things go. We were asking at a diner on the main street about a particular stretch of county road, and the woman working the floor listened to our question and looked at us for a moment and then said we should ask about Devil's Elbow instead. Her name was Pauline. She had worked that diner for 30 years, which is long enough in a place like that to become something between an employee and an institution. She knew which questions to answer and which ones to set down on the table and walk away from, and she did both with the same unhurried manner. She told us to come back the next morning and she would have more time. We came back. We spoke with Pauline and with 2 other people she directed us to, and with the camp manager of a property near Devil's Elbow, who answered the phone on a Tuesday afternoon and talked for 20 minutes before he seemed to remember that he hadn't intended to say as much as he had. We spent 2 days in that county. This is what we assembled. Devil's Elbow is a bend in a creek in the eastern part of the county, accessible by a trail that runs 4 miles from a small campground through second-growth timber and old farmland going back to forest. The creek at the elbow is wide and shallow, a classic Appalachian ford, flat stones, clear water, the kind of crossing that appears in hiking guides as a moderate ford, easy in summer use caution in high water. People have been crossing it for as long as people have been using that trail, which, according to the County Historical Society, is a very long time. There is a rule about the crossing. Everyone in that county knows it. Pauline said it to us the same way she would tell you that the road to the elbow washes out in March and you take the upper route instead. As a practical matter, learned the hard way, not requiring explanation. The rule is, when the birds stop, you turn around. You do not cross Devil's Elbow Creek when it's quiet. She did not explain what happens if you do. When the husband in the account asked her directly, she told us she remembered this clearly. She said, "You might come back fine, or you might come back different." She refilled their coffee and moved to the next table, and that was the whole warning, given plainly, accepted poorly. The family, the husband and wife, both in their late 30s, hikers, experienced enough to have good gear and not experienced enough to know that good gear is not the same as local knowledge, had rented a cabin at the campground near the trailhead for 4 nights in mid-October. They had researched the trails online. They had the right boots and the right layers and a water filter and a paper map of the county trail system. They had breakfast at Pauline's diner on their first morning, and Pauline told them the rule, and they thanked her and left a good tip and went to hike the elbow loop. They crossed the creek at 10:30 in the morning on day 1. The birds were loud, the particular layered noise of a mixed October flock working the creek corridor, the kind of sound that fills the hollow completely and bounces off the water. They crossed easily, flat stones solid under their boots, water cold and clear. The loop was beautiful. They were back at the cabin by 3 in the afternoon, satisfied and slightly sunburned from the open ridge section. They crossed again on day 2, same time, same conditions, birds active, water unchanged. 2 crossings without incident. Pauline's warning, which the husband had described at dinner the first night as charming local folklore, receded further into the category of things you respect without taking literally. On day 3, they arrived at the crossing at 2 in the afternoon. The wife noticed the quiet first. She mentioned it while they were still on the approach trail, maybe a quarter mile from the creek, that the birds had dropped off, that the hollow had gone from its usual layered noise to something flatter. The husband said it was the weather changing, a cold front moving in, the barometric pressure doing something that made birds shelter earlier than usual. This was a reasonable explanation. He had read something about this once, and it had stayed with him, the way convenient facts do. They reached the ford. The creek looked exactly as it had for the previous 2 crossings, same water level, same stone arrangement, same clarity. The husband stepped in first. The wife followed. The crossing was normal. The water was cold. They reached the far bank and continued on the loop trail. 30 minutes later, heading back toward the ford for the return crossing, the wife saw the stones. The ford stones, the specific flat-topped rocks they had used on both previous crossings. The ones she had mentally mapped because she was the more cautious crosser and she liked to plan her steps, were underwater. Not deeply. 6, 8 inches, enough that the tops were not visible, enough that the ford had changed from a step-to-step crossing to a wade. She stopped at the bank and looked at the water. There had been no rain. The sky was overcast but dry, had been dry all day. The creek above them was making the same sound it always made. No surge, no increase in flow noise. In the 30 minutes since they had crossed going out, the water had come up enough to submerge the crossing stones. The husband measured it against the bank. He had noted the water line on their way out, a habit, he said, from crossing with a pack, and the mark was now 8 inches below the surface. They waded across. The water was cold in a way the wife found difficult to describe later, and described anyway, because it was the detail she kept returning to. Not mountain cold, she said. Not the cold of snowmelt or groundwater. Something that felt like cold as a property of the water itself rather than of its temperature, as if the cold were the water's primary characteristic rather than a condition of the season. They reached the cabin at 4:30, made dinner. Did not discuss the water level in any sustained way because the husband had an explanation for it. Upstream, snowmelt release maybe, or a beaver dam somewhere above them finally letting go. And because the wife's sense of the cold in the water was not something she felt ready to describe to him yet. She was still deciding how to say it when, at 2 a.m, she woke to find his side of the bed empty. She found him on the porch. He was standing at the railing facing the tree line, wearing his sleep clothes. No jacket, no shoes. The temperature was in the low 40s. He was not shivering. He was standing with the particular stillness of someone who is not aware they are cold, facing the tree line in the direction that was directly away from the creek. She put her hand on his arm and said his name. He turned and looked at her, and he was awake, or he became awake in that moment, she could not be certain which. He said he didn't know why he was on the porch. He said he didn't remember coming outside. He rubbed his face and followed her back inside and got into bed and was asleep again in minutes. She lay beside him and looked at the ceiling for a long time. In the morning, he seemed entirely himself. Made coffee, talked about the ridge section they hadn't finished, checked the weather on his phone. She watched him. He was fine. He was normal. She decided she was reading into things. She drove to Pauline's diner alone after breakfast, while he stayed at the cabin to repair a strap on his pack. She sat at the counter and Pauline came over and looked at her face and said, "Which day did you cross?" She said, "Day 3. Pauline asked if they had crossed both ways. She said yes. Pauline set down the coffee pot and leaned against the counter. She said, "The second crossing is the problem. It's not about the water level. The water level is just what happens when it's ready. It's about what's in the water when it's quiet." The wife asked what was in the water. Pauline looked at her, not dramatically, not performing gravity, just looking at her the way you look at someone when you are deciding how much of the true thing to say. She said, "Something that's been in that creek a very long time. It doesn't mean harm the first time. The first time it's just present. The second time, it takes something with it. Something small you don't always notice right away." She paused. She picked up the coffee pot. She said, "How's your husband this morning?" The wife said fine. She said it automatically, the way you say it, and then she stopped because she had left him at the cabin 40 minutes ago, and she had watched him make coffee and talk about the trail, and she had decided he was fine. And fine was what she had decided, but Pauline was asking and the question had a weight to it that fine did not fully address. She looked at Pauline. She said she didn't know. Pauline nodded, like this was the honest answer she had been waiting for. The wife drove back to the cabin. The drive was 12 minutes. She called his phone twice. He answered on the second call and sounded exactly like himself. Warm, slightly distracted. The familiar voice of a person doing something with their hands while talking. She asked how he slept. He said fine. She asked if he remembered being on the porch. He said, "Why would I do that?" Not, I don't think so. Why would I do that? The question form of a denial, which sounds like an answer but is not quite one. She noticed this and said nothing and drove the remaining 6 minutes to the cabin. He was at the table when she came in, the pack in his lap, the repair strap in his hands. He looked up and smiled. He was the same person she had driven 4 hours to this county with, made 2 good dinners with, hiked 12 miles with over 3 days. He was the same. She looked at him and tried to identify what Pauline's question had put into her that had not been there before, and the only thing she could find was this. She was looking at him more carefully than she had been, and looking more carefully, she was not certain that what she was seeing was everything that was there. She did not say anything about what Pauline had told her. She came in and set her keys on the counter and poured herself the last of the coffee and sat across from him while he worked on the pack strap. And she watched him the way you watch something you are trying to memorize. Not obviously, not in a way he would notice, just with the particular attention of someone who has been told to look more carefully and cannot stop. He was fine. He worked the strap with the focused patience he brought to anything mechanical. He talked about the ridge section they hadn't finished and whether the weather would hold for a morning start. He made her laugh once, which was the thing she kept coming back to later, that he made her laugh, that it was a real laugh, that nothing about him in that moment felt wrong. She laughed and thought, maybe Pauline is wrong. Maybe the water was a beaver dam releasing. Maybe he sleepwalks sometimes, and she has never noticed because they don't always share a room in new places, and the unfamiliar architecture of someone else's cabin had produced a single episode that meant nothing. She thought this carefully and thoroughly and almost convinced herself. That afternoon they packed. She said she wanted to leave a day early because the weather was going to turn, and she didn't want to drive the mountain roads in rain. He checked his phone, checked the forecast, and said, "Okay, no argument." He started carrying bags to the car. She registered the lack of argument. He would normally have argued. Not a real argument, just the mild, good-natured resistance of someone who had planned to finish the ridge section and was being asked to give it up. He would have said something about the weather forecast being wrong half the time, about one morning hike being worth the risk, about how they'd come all this way. He would have negotiated. It was one of the things she had learned about him in 7 years, that he negotiated pleasantly and then accepted the outcome gracefully. He accepted it before the negotiation. He just said, "Okay," and started carrying bags. She stood in the cabin and looked at him through the window, walking to the car, and she told herself it was a small thing, that people varied, that sometimes you just said, "Okay." She returned the key at the camp manager's office near the entrance. The manager was a man in his late 50s with the unhurried manner of someone who had run a property in a mountain county long enough to have seen every kind of guest departure. She told him they were leaving early. He nodded and took the key and started to turn back to his desk. She said, "Can I ask you something about the Devil's Elbow crossing?" He turned back. He looked at her, not at the key tag, not at the office behind her, at her face. He said, "Which day did you cross?" It was the same question Pauline had asked, the exact same words in the same order. She understood in that moment that it was the diagnostic question, the first thing you asked in that county when someone came to you with a certain look on their face after hiking the elbow loop. She said, "Day 3. She said both ways. He set the key down on the desk. He said, "Give it a week. He'll be himself again, mostly." She asked what mostly meant. He looked at the window in the direction of the trail. He said he couldn't explain it better than that. He said mostly was the word he had found that was most accurate, and he had tried other words, and they were either too alarming or not alarming enough, and mostly sat closest to the truth. She asked about other families. He said, "The oldest account I know is second-hand, from 40 years ago. Second family, the husband moved away. They haven't heard from him since." He paused. He said, "You crossed twice, not 3 times. You're in better shape than the second family." She asked what 3 times meant. He picked up the key again and put it in the drawer, and she understood that the conversation was over, not because he was being cruel, but because he had said what was useful and the rest was not useful. She drove. He rode. 4 hours back down the mountain and through the foothills and onto the interstate. The kind of drive that is usually filled with the particular comfortable conversation of people returning from a trip they enjoyed, the recap and the rating and the planning of the next one. They did not turn on the radio. He looked out the passenger window for most of the drive. She looked at the road and checked him in her peripheral vision every few minutes, and every time she checked, he was looking out the window at the passing ridgeline, and she could not have said what he was looking at or whether he was looking at anything. He was mostly himself in the week that followed. The mostly appeared in small ways, at irregular intervals, like a station coming in and going out. He was warm and present and funny, and then briefly somewhere else, not far, not unreachable, just slightly outside the room even when he was in it. She noticed it and did not say anything because she had no language for it that would not sound like an accusation or a symptom. 2 things did not resolve. The first, he moved the bathroom mirrors. Both of them, the one above the sink and the one on the back of the door. He put them in the garage. When she asked, he said the light in the bathroom made the room look wrong, and he didn't like it. She checked the light. The light was fine. She did not press it. The mirrors went to the garage and stayed there. The second thing appeared 3 weeks after they returned, when she was looking for something in the coat closet and found the cabin guest book in his jacket pocket. She did not know he had taken it. She did not ask him about it, because by then she had stopped asking questions that she was not certain she wanted answered. She opened it to the last entries. The page that had been torn out was still gone. The entry that ended mid-sentence, "Whatever you do, don't let the kids," was still cut off at the edge. She looked at the last page before the torn one. He had written something there. She recognized his handwriting. He had written in the space below the last proper entry, in the small neat print he used for notes, a single line. "I can hear it when the water's running." She closed the guest book and put it back in his pocket and put the jacket back in the closet. They separated 3 months later. She told the friend who connected her to us that it was not a single thing, that it was the accumulation of the mostly, that she was not certain he was aware of the change, that she thought he was the same person operating on a frequency she could no longer fully receive. She said she still loved him. She said this with the particular sadness of someone making a distinction that matters. Still loving someone is not the same as being able to stay. A contact in the county spoke with the camp manager the following spring. The manager said he had already heard from her. He said he was sorry it had gone the way it did. He said Pauline had warned them well, which was the most Pauline could do. The contact asked if there was anything that could be done for people who had crossed twice, in the wrong conditions. The manager looked at the tree line in the direction of the Devil's Elbow Trail. He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Not by us." The contact asked what he meant by that. He did not elaborate. He went back inside his office and the conversation was over. A friend of the wife's, someone with a surveying background who did not know the story and was shown the guestbook page without context, identified the pattern of the husband's handwriting entry as something other than words. The friend said the letter forms, when looked at as shapes rather than letters, traced a consistent topographic contour, a specific bend in a creek viewed from above. The scale, the friend said, was consistent with a USGS 1.24 thousand map. The wife asked the friend if they could identify which creek. The friend said they would need the right map sheets to be certain, but based on the contour shape, it looked like a ford. A wide, shallow ford on a creek in a mountain county. The friend asked where she had gotten the page. She said from a guest book. The friend said whoever wrote it knew their topographic notation very well. She said he didn't. The friend looked at her and looked at the page and did not say anything else. The creek at Devil's Elbow looks completely ordinary in photographs taken the following spring. A hiking club posted a set of images from the loop trail, the ridge section, the ford, the return path. In the photographs, the birds are audible even in the image metadata somehow, the EGCF data showing the file creation time during what must have been peak morning bird activity. The ford is clear, the stones are visible, the water is shallow and cold-looking and perfectly ordinary. The comments on the hiking club post include directions and parking notes, and one comment from an account with no profile picture that says only, "Cross in the morning, not the afternoon, and only once." The comment has no replies. The account that posted it has no other activity. The next account is different from every other one we have shared tonight. There is no narrator, no family, no ranger, no deputy, no forum post, only a letter. Handwritten on plain paper, folded into a standard envelope. Postmarked from a mountain county, no return address. The postmark date is from 3 years ago. We have had the paper and ink examined. The results are consistent with genuine materials of the approximate age suggested by the postmark. No digital origin, no reproduction. Someone sat down with paper and a pen and wrote this by hand and mailed it. We do not know who sent it. We have written to the rural route box number on the postmark. We have received no reply. This is what the letter says. We'll read it as it was written. We have not changed anything. We don't know how to. I am writing this because I do not think I will be able to explain it in person. That is not the kind of thing I would normally say about myself. I am a person who explains things. It is, as far as I know, what I am best at. But I have been in this cabin for 3 nights now, and I am writing this on the 3rd night. And there is something in the hall outside this room, and I find that explanation, as a tool, has reached the edge of what it can do for me. I should tell you about the room first. The rental listing for Alderman Station describes the property as a historic ranger station, converted to a private rental, 2 bedrooms, full kitchen, wood stove, porch, creek access, remote location with no cell service. This is all accurate. What the listing does not mention is the door at the end of the hall off the kitchen. The listing calls it a utility closet. It is not a utility closet. It is a room 12 feet by 14 feet with a north-facing window, a chair in the center, and walls covered floor to ceiling in pencil writing. I found it on my first afternoon. I opened the door expecting a closet and stood in the doorway for a long time, looking at the walls. Then I closed the door and went back to the kitchen and made dinner, and decided I would look at it properly in the morning, in better light, because first impressions of a room full of writing on the walls are not always accurate, and I have learned to give myself time before drawing conclusions. The writing is layered. This is the first thing you understand when you spend time with it, which I did on the 2nd night. Multiple hands, multiple instruments, pencil over pencil, some sections inked over penciled drafts, some areas so dense with overlaid text that individual words are no longer readable, just texture. The newest layer is the clearest, written in a confident, even hand that belongs to someone who was calm when they wrote it, or who had achieved the appearance of calm, which is sometimes the same thing and sometimes not. The newest layer repeats one phrase across all 4 walls and the ceiling. I had to move the chair to the center of the room and stand on it to read the ceiling portion, which is written in the same hand, in the same size, with the same careful spacing as everything else. The phrase is, "Do not answer if it calls your name from the hall." It appears 14 times that I counted, 14 times, on 4 walls in the ceiling, in varying orientations, some horizontal, some at angles, as if the writer had written it every time they thought of it, from whatever position they happened to be in. I stood on the chair in the center of the room and looked at all 14 instances, and I told myself what any reasonable person tells themselves in that situation. Previous renters, isolated for too long, possibly drinking, filling the walls of a back room the way people fill spaces when they have too much time and too little distraction. The chair was the giveaway, I thought. Someone had sat in this room for extended periods and written on the walls around them. Many someones, given the layers. Eccentric behavior, collectively produced over years. This explanation satisfied me well enough to sleep. On the second night, I went back with a lantern and spent 2 hours with the older layers. There is a name in the third layer down. I am not going to write it here. Not because it frightens me, but because it is not my name, and I do not know whose it is, and it does not seem right to reproduce it without understanding why it is there. The name appears 7 times in the third layer, always beside a date. I looked at the dates. They were not sequential. They were spaced across what appeared to be several years, based on the ink aging between occurrences. One of the dates was the date of my arrival. I want to be precise about this because precision is the only tool I have left that I trust. The third layer of writing in that room, writing that predates my arrival by what the ink aging suggests is at least a decade, possibly more, contains my arrival date written beside a name I do not recognize, in handwriting that is not mine and not any handwriting I know. I sat with this for a long time. I considered the explanations. The date could be coincidental. Arrival dates repeat. Any given date appears every year. And I had chosen my dates based on availability and weather forecasts rather than any fixed plan. The name beside it could be the writer's own name, or a name of someone they were writing about, with no connection to my visit at all. These are reasonable explanations. I wrote them down in my notebook, in my own handwriting, and I looked at them and I decided they were reasonable, and I went to bed. I want to tell you about the phrase change before I tell you what is happening tonight, because the phrase change is what moved this from a strange coincidence to something I do not have a category for. Before I sat down in that room on the second night, I photographed the walls. All 4 walls and the ceiling. Systematic, overlapping frames, the way you document something when you want a complete record. I do this as a habit when I encounter something I want to think about later. I photograph it so I do not have to rely on memory, which is an instrument I trust less than a camera. I have the photographs. They show the newest layer clearly. The phrase reads, "Do not answer if it calls your name from the hall." This morning, the morning of the third day, I went back into the room with the photographs on my phone and compared them to the walls. In the photographs, the phrase reads, "Do not answer." On 3 of the 4 walls, the phrase now reads, "Do not leave." I stood in the room with my phone in one hand and looked at the wall in front of me for a long time. The handwriting is the same. The pencil weight is the same. The spacing is the same. The only difference is that 3 of the 4 instances of the phrase have changed from "do not answer" to "do not leave." And this change does not appear in photographs taken before I went to sleep. I do not know when the change occurred. I do not know if I was conscious when it occurred. I do not know if I made the change myself in some state I am not aware of and do not remember. I am recording this because I want there to be a record that is not my memory, which, as I said, is an instrument I trust less than I used to. Now, I will tell you about tonight. It called my name from the hall at 11:47. I know the time because I noted it immediately. It was not a dramatic sound. This is important. If you imagine a voice calling from a dark hallway, you probably imagine something designed to frighten. A low voice, or a distorted voice, or a voice with something wrong about its pitch or its texture. This was not that. It was an ordinary voice. It was the most ordinary voice I have heard, in the way that a thing can be so precisely normal that the normalcy itself is the wrongness. It called my name once, clearly, with the inflection of someone who wanted to ask me something small, something unimportant. The inflection of, "I have a quick question, it will only take a moment." I did not answer. I was in this room. I am in this room. The door is pulled to but not latched because the latch is on the hall side, and I did not want to reach into the hall to engage it. It called again at 12:03. This time, the voice was different. Same inflection, same small request quality, same ordinary register, but a different voice. Someone else. Someone I also know. I will not write who, for the same reason I will not write the name from the wall. It called again at 12:19, 12:41, 1:07, and 1:32. 6 times total, 6 different voices, or some of the same voices in different arrangements. I am not certain because I was not taking notes at first and I am working from memory for the early calls, which is exactly the situation I was trying to avoid by photographing the walls. What I can tell you with certainty, none of the voices were the same twice. Each one was someone I know. Each one had the exact particular sound of a specific person. Not a general impression of them, not an approximation, but the specific frequency of their voice, the specific way they form certain sounds, the specific rhythm of how they speak when they are being casual. Something out there has heard these people speak, or it has found another way to know them, which is a thought I am going to set aside for now because I need to be functional for the next few hours. The window is showing the beginning of a change. Not light yet, not light exactly, but the quality of the dark outside the glass has shifted in the way it shifts in the last hour before dawn, when the dark becomes less certain of itself. I have been studying the oldest layer of writing while I wait. The layer beneath everything else, the earliest pencil, the words faded to the edge of legibility. I have been working at it with my phone flashlight held at a raking angle. The oldest layer uses different phrasing. The newest layer says, "Do not answer if it calls your name from the hall." The oldest layer, the first writing, the original instruction, says, "Do not let it learn your name." The newest warning is reactive. Someone wrote it after it had already learned. The first warning is preventative, written by someone who knew what it was trying to do before it succeeded. I have been in this room for 3 nights. I have spoken my name aloud exactly once, on the first afternoon, on the phone, before the signal dropped, to someone who asked me to confirm I had arrived safely. The window is lighter. I am going to describe what happened on the second night from the beginning, so that whoever reads this has the complete account. But first, it has stopped calling. Approximately 3 minutes ago. 6 times it called, and now it has stopped, and the hall is quiet, and I do not know if quiet means it has gone or if quiet means it has decided to wait in a different way. I find that I am not sure which one I am hoping for. The letter continues. I did not write again for some time after that last line. I want to account for the gap so the record is complete. The stopping, the silence after the 6th call, lasted approximately 40 minutes. I sat in the chair, and I watched the door, and I watched the window, and I did not move, and I did not speak, and I did not write, because writing requires looking down, and I was not willing to look down. At 2:47, the window showed color. Not full light, not even close to full light, but the particular gray-blue that comes before, the gray that comes before the actual dawn, the first suggestion that the dark is negotiable. I had been waiting for it for hours, and when it came, I was surprised by how small it was, how thin, a suggestion of color at the edge of glass and nothing more. I stood up from the chair. Here is what I did. I picked up this letter, which I'd been writing on the floor beside the chair, and I folded it and put it in my jacket pocket. I picked up the lantern. I picked up my notebook. I did not pick up anything else because everything else was in the main room, and the main room required walking through the hall, and I had decided I was going to walk through the hall exactly once, in one direction, at a pace I chose, looking at the front door. The door to this room opens inward. I pulled it toward me. The hall was empty. I want to be accurate. The hall appeared empty. It was not fully light. The lantern carried a radius of about 6 feet, and the hall was 12 feet long, and I could see the kitchen doorway at the far end, and the kitchen beyond it with the gray window light coming through. And between me and the kitchen, the hall appeared empty. Whether it was empty in any complete sense, I cannot tell you, because I did not stop to determine it. I walked through it at the pace I had chosen, and I did not look at the walls, and I did not look at the ceiling, and I looked at the front door. The front door had a deadbolt and a knob lock. I had locked both every night. Both were still locked. I turned them and opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The cold hit me in a way that felt correct. Outside cold, the real kind. The kind that belongs to a specific morning in a specific place and means nothing except that it is cold and you are outside. I stood on the porch for one breath, and then I walked to my car. As I crossed the main room, and I am writing this now because I could not write it then, I saw the hall. The hall behind me, leading to the back room. The chair was in the hall. It had been in the center of the back room when I stood up from it. I had not moved it. I had picked up the letter and the lantern and the notebook, and I had pulled the door open, and I had walked through the hall, and I had not touched the chair. The chair was on wheels, small casters, the kind on an old office chair, but the hall floor is carpeted. Chairs on casters do not roll across carpet. The chair was in the hall, facing the front door, positioned in the center of the hall as if someone had placed it there deliberately, at the angle you would place a chair if you wanted to watch the front door from a seated position. I looked at it for the length of one breath. Then I looked at the front door. Then I left. The car started. The road was clear. I drove to the county road and stopped and wrote the last section of this letter in the car with the engine running and the heater going and the radio on. Because I needed the radio on, I needed something in the car that was a human voice doing something ordinary. And I found a station playing morning farm reports, and I listened to soybean futures and regional auction dates, and I wrote. I do not know who to send this to. I am sending it to the address on the back of this envelope, which I found on a piece of paper tucked inside the guest book at the station. I do not know who left it there or when. I am choosing to believe it is the right address because I need to send this somewhere, and it is the only address I have. What I know, the hall was empty each time I checked it from the doorway. The voices were real. I do not have an explanation for the photographs. I do not have an explanation for the chair. I do not have an explanation for the oldest writing on the walls, which was written before it learned to use names, and which was written by someone who knew what it was trying to do. I will say one more thing, and then I am going to drive home. The voices were frightening because of how ordinary they were, but the thing that I keep returning to, the thing that I think will stay with me in the way that certain things stay, is not the voices. It is the oldest writing. Someone was in that room before it learned to call names. Someone sat in that chair and wrote on those walls, and the instruction they left was not, "Do not answer." It was, "Do not let it learn your name." Which means there was a time when it did not know how. Which means it has been in that hall, or somewhere near it, for long enough to learn. I do not know how long that is. I do not know how it learns. I know that I said my name once, on the phone, on the first afternoon, and that by the third night it knew how to sound like 6 different people I love. I am going now. The letter ends there. We contacted the property owner. She is a woman who has managed Alderman Station as a rental for 11 years, inherited the property from her aunt, who ran it before her for 20 years before that. She answered the phone on the second ring. When we explained that we had received a letter describing a stay at her property, she was quiet for a moment and then said, "The back room." Not a question. She confirmed the room exists. She confirmed it is not on the listing. She confirmed the chair. She said she had the walls painted over in the spring of 2019 after a renter suggested it. We asked if the painting helped. She paused. She said the writing came back in approximately 6 weeks. She said it came back in the same hands, the same phrases, the same placement, as if the paint had been a temporary interruption rather than a removal. We asked if she had considered closing the room permanently, sealing the door, removing access. She said she had considered it. She said her aunt had also considered it. She said the door had been locked once, for a period of about 4 months in the early 90s, with a deadbolt installed on the outside, and that after 4 months the deadbolt had been found on the floor inside the room, on the carpet, still in the strike plate, the screws intact, as if the entire assembly had been pressed through the door from the outside. She said the door has not been locked since. She asked if the person who wrote the letter was all right. We told her, as far as we knew, yes. She said good. She said mostly they were. She asked if they had been in the room all 3 nights. We said, based on the letter, yes. She said, 3 nights in the room is long. Most people last 1. We asked what she meant by last. She said, most people who find the room spend 1 night, leave the next morning, don't say anything to anyone. 3 nights, that's someone who is trying to understand it. Those are the ones who write things down. We asked how many letters she had received or heard about. She said, a few, over the years. We asked what happened to the other letter writers. She said she didn't know, in most cases. She said she hoped they were fine. She said it the way the camp manager at Briar Fork had said mostly, with precision, with the specific honesty of someone using the word that is most accurate rather than the word that is most comforting. Before we ended the call, we told her one more thing. We told her about the photographs, the phrase change, the walls reading "do not answer" in the images and "do not leave" in the room itself, on 3 of 4 walls. She listened. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, when you speak with the person who wrote the letter, if you do, ask them to look at the 4th wall, the one that still said "do not answer." Ask them which direction it was facing. We asked why. She said, because in my experience, that wall always faces the door. Always. The one that still says answer. It faces the door and the other 3 say leave, and I've always thought that meant something, but I've never been able to decide what. We said we would ask if we were able to reach the letter writer. We have not been able to reach the letter writer. The rural route box number has returned our letters unopened. The postmark county has no listing for anyone matching the description we have assembled from the letter's internal details. We do not know their name. We know only that they said it once, on the first afternoon, on the phone, to someone who asked them to confirm they had arrived safely. We hope they drove home. We believe they did. The letter was mailed, which means they reached a post office, which means they reached a town, which means the car started and the road was clear, and the morning farm report on the radio covered soybean futures and regional auction dates all the way down the mountain. We hope that is the whole story. The property owner's final question before she hung up was this: was the writing still in 4 hands, or were there 5 this time? We told her we would have to look at the photographs. She said, "If there are 5, if there's a new hand in that room, I'd like to know." A pause. "Actually," another pause. "No, don't tell me. If it started writing in a 5th hand, I don't want to know what it says." She hung up. We looked at the photographs. We are not going to tell her. The letter writer's final line, the one they wrote in the car with the engine running and the farm report on the radio: "I am going now." We believe them. We choose to believe them. Some accounts require you to choose what you believe about the ending, because the ending is the only part you cannot verify, and the alternative, that they are still there, that the car did not start, that the road was not clear, that the letter arrived on its own, is not something we are prepared to say out loud. What we will say is this: the room at Alderman Station is still there. The walls have been painted twice. The writing returns. The chair is on wheels that cannot roll across carpet. The door that was deadbolted from the outside was found unlocked from the inside. And somewhere in the layered pencil beneath everything else, beneath the names and the dates and the warnings and the phrase that changed in the night, is the oldest instruction, written by someone who knew what it was trying to do before it learned how to do it. They wrote it before it learned names, before it learned voices, before it learned to sound like 6 different people you love, calling from a hallway, asking for just a moment of your time. Do not let it learn your name. They left that warning for whoever came next. Whoever came next left a warning in the newer layer. And that layer says, "Do not answer." 3 layers of people in that room, in that chair, leaving instructions for each other across years they would never share. The only thing they agreed on completely, the only rule that appears in every layer, in every hand, in some form, is this: whatever it sounds like, however well it knows you, however ordinary and small and familiar the voice is when it comes from the hall, do not answer.